Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of OP Radio. My name's Mac. I'm a content strategist at OP Labs. That intro music was The Buterin by Ben Jones, one of the co-founders of Optimism, and Gigamesh, one of the co-founders of Sound.xyz. We have one of the other co-founders of Sound with us here today. His name's David. Super excited to talk with him about all things sound and music NFTs. Good morning, David. How you doing?
I'm doing great, especially after hearing that song a few times.
Yeah, that song has been on heavy rotation since it came out for me a few days ago. I'm one of these people who just plays a song to death until I can't stand it anymore. And that's how I kind of get it out of my head. I got to work it out of the system.
I think that should have been our pre-show ritual, Mac.
Okay, so David, before we get into sound and all the good stuff there, I'm just curious about your background. I always like to hear the personal anecdotes from the people that come on OP Radio. So can you give us like an overview of who you are, where you came from, and how you got started in crypto and sound?
Yeah, so the crypto part and the music part come from two different parts of the world, and obviously merged together. But the music came first. Actually, I got lucky. I always tell this story, and grew up in New York City. And the CEO of Atlantic Records, who's still there to this date, went to my high school and basically came to speak. And I was always really fascinated in music, just growing up, and was thought it'd be really, really cool to try and get an internship there. And he was, lucky enough to let me start working there. And so I got my start really young, just working at a record label and talking to artists and managers and A&R and trying to understand how the music industry works. And I didn't really I got into music because of my love of music, but I uncovered obviously that there's like everything else in the world, there's a business behind it. And I became as fascinated in the business behind it and some of the just tension that like quickly emerged from artists that are some of the most creative people in the world, and kind of the business model of music, which wasn't always the most creative and flexible. And I've always been trying to figure out where my place in music was going to be. There was a very brief moment in time where I thought maybe it could be as an artist, but then realized, that wasn't where my talent lied. And so I always was like on the forefront of like where things were headed, and music and technology together, never one without the other, were always my two interests. And the rest of my career has largely been built building product and working at various startups. And I spent a couple of years in the Bay Area at Pandora working on recommendation systems. And I've always been interested in like where talent and music lies on the internet, and how do you build things that surface the best talent to the top. I think one of the things I always talk about is, I'm a huge basketball fan. We obviously just concluded the NBA finals, and some of the best basketball players are in the NBA. I don't always believe that the best artists or some of the most talented artists are necessarily discovered. And how do you create systems that make it so that anywhere in the world, regardless of who you are or who if you're talented at music, you should be able to make a full-time career off your music. And that was a lot of the inspiration that's obviously, guided a lot of my career. I think crypto, I actually got interested in 2017 through a much more innocuous story, which was like somebody that I was in college with that didn't take class very seriously, just kept talking about obviously the speculation side and how much he was making. And I got so confused about how he was making so much, getting such bad grades, that I started to dive in to crypto and became really interested in obviously how you could move money around so seamlessly and with trust. And that was actually something that I tied to music, because one of the problems with music is artists don't always get paid fairly or accurately. And so I was just super interested in how do you build a fast, transparent, accurate global payment system for music that is permissionless, that anyone can trust in the world. And that was a lot of the early inspiration behind sound. So that's a little bit of the background, Mac.
Awesome. Very interesting. Yeah, actually, people may not know this about me, but I'm also a musician. I went to music production school. So that tension between the artistic side of music and the creative aspect and the business side really resonates with me, because I think, nowadays artists in general and musicians in particular, there's unprecedented opportunity, right? Like nobody's necessarily gatekeeping you from creating your art and putting it out into the world. The problem with that, though, is that there is so much that it's hard to separate the signal from the noise. And if you're an artist, it's really hard to build a fan base and have people discover you. So, and a lot of artists, I think you kind of touched on this, David, they're not necessarily, they're artists, they're creative. They're not necessarily thinking about distribution or marketing. that's not really their skill set
Yeah,
often.
but before we get into anything, I think it's like, it's just super critical that we like talk about the problems in the music industry, because I think that's the foundation for like why we do anything, including, experimenting obviously with moving to optimism. I mean, I think it always starts with the two problems that I bring up, which are, one, how do you help artists reach the most amount of people with their music? And two, how do you help artists make money on their music? Those are the only two problems that we're obviously trying to solve here. I think that the first problem I always say is like the cost to make music has actually come down phenomenally. I mean, you're seeing this obviously, like the latest trend and fad here is the AI music, which basically makes it zero. But for a while, like the tools in a positive way have been amazing. You can now, a kid with a laptop can make, world class music. But because there's so much content, as Matt talked about, there's more music than ever, being uploaded to the internet per day. And, there's the famous 100,000 tracks per day to Spotify. And so we need more methods to discover music and find music. And, in the last 20 years, there's really been four major products that have changed the way we discover music. One is MySpace, two is YouTube, three is SoundCloud, and four is now TikTok. And I think part of what bothers me about TikTok, although I think it does many things really well in terms of the idea that anything can go viral at any time, is that TikTok was never a music platform. It was a video platform. And the way I know that is the video is truly what goes viral. The song is attached. And something that started to bother me is like you're kind of moving music to the background. Like you've heard these songs because they play all over these videos, but you don't necessarily know who the artist is. And part of what, when I was growing up buying CDs and at a record store was like so meaningful was because I only had so much money to spend. And every time I bought one of the CDs, it really formed like a deeper connection with that, music and with that artist ultimately. And, today you can have a heck ton amount of streams, but it doesn't necessarily translate to real fans. So I think one of the things I was interested in, and one of the things about sound, is like we're always trying to lean into things like less about what's already working and more about what are the net new things that we can obviously create. And so one of the things that we feel is like an opportunity today is to make a more active connection between an artist and a listener. And how do you leverage the millions and millions and millions and billions of music listeners across the world to basically be your talent scouts, to go find out about new music, instead of it being controlled by one company and running all the editorial playlists? How do you make it so that any user across the world can basically run the hottest playlist on the internet? And that's something that I think is really, really, so how do we somewhat make it so that anyone can find out, can be a tastemaker in music? And then on the other side, I think it's how do you help artists make more of a living? There's this big notion that you can't make money on music. You have to do touring and merch and all these revenue streams. And I think touring and merch are absolutely phenomenal and great. Like there's nothing wrong with them. But I think this idea that music is not valuable is something that I've always wanted to challenge. And I think today the business model of music requires you to get millions and millions and millions and millions of streams in order to make any real amount of money. And one of the things that's always bothered me is, why is there only one price for music? Like you go to a restaurant, there's multiple prices for multiple items. I've never seen an art form where there's just one price for every single, song, regardless of who it is, no matter if it's a 30-second song, an 8-minute song, everyone pays the same amount. And this isn't some streaming trend. This existed in iTunes with 99 cents. This existed with, CDs with $9.99. I've always been interested in this like concept of like pay what you want, where how do you capture the demand that's there for music? And like, let's not stop some, music listener from wanting to, invest in an artist in some way, shape, or form. And that was something that like rang true, obviously, about sound. And so we wanted to kind of experiment with how do we value music. And, we've gone through this entire journey of, different minting formats and a lot of really, really fun stuff with creating this emotional connection. So at the end of the day, sound, has been a suite of tools that let artists experiment with their music in new ways, and artists upload their songs, and basically people can collect essentially a digital vinyl of that song. And a lot of the times that digital vinyl is really scarce, so they hold value. But it's really a way for people to emotionally connect with a song and an artist, and like leave their, footprint on that song, almost like joining the song credits of an album. When you purchased it back in the day, there were these like liner notes that people probably remember, and kind of join this audience section. And today we've paid out $5.5 million to artists in just over a year and a half, and we're gearing up to open sound to all artists in a very short time period. So that's the quick little background on the problems that we're trying to solve. And yeah, it's been a fun journey so far.
Very cool. Yeah, it seems like I had a very brief stint in the music industry, but it seems like the model for a lot of up and coming artists was like the way they actually made money and supported themselves was through merch and live shows and touring. which is all well and good, but that's also tethered to a physical location, right? And not all the fans maybe are able to go and see that artist in person, buy that T-shirt, go see them live. And so, yeah, I love this idea of just providing more flexibility in the ways that fans can support the artists and the musicians that they love.
Yeah, I think a lot of this, and I've been probably the most inspired by like concerts, because I always say, like, as much as I love the internet, concerts will remain the holy grail for music. And even on Sound, like we have this audience section where when you collect the music NFT, you can join like a crowd of backers, and that was really inspired because I wanted it to like feel like like a concert in terms of who are the other people that are there collecting the music with you. But yeah, I think I'm full of analogies, but like, there's the Grateful Dead, there's Fish, there's a lot of artists with cult like followings. And if you look at their Spotify numbers, they're in the hundreds of thousands of monthly listeners. They're making basically no money off their music on something like Spotify, but their fans will spend hundreds and thousands of dollars and sell out football stadiums around the world to basically play live shows. And how is the delta between what they're willing to spend on something like a live show so off from like the music experience online? And how do you make it feel as close as possible, or create net new experiences for people to celebrate and collect music online in a way that feels like a concert? And that to me, is the indicator that we haven't evolved the experience of music online in a way that makes it have that emotional attachment that a concert has. And I think, not every artist can tour, not every artist wants to tour, and music is ultimately what builds an artist's fan base in the first place. And so it feels like there's an opportunity to celebrate music in a more fun way. And wouldn't it be more fun if, the community and the audience and actual music lovers can create that culture? So that's kind of the gist of it.
Yeah, and I see a lot of different use cases here, but I think we can distinguish maybe between indie artists or up and coming artists and then more established ones. On the indie side of things, I see this as an opportunity to help them sort of bootstrap their fan base and continue to create music. And I think, getting that ball rolling initially is oftentimes the hardest thing with any creative endeavor. It's often hard to sort of hit critical mass and support yourself solely from your art. So I see this as an opportunity to just bootstrap that process a little quicker. On the more established artist side, I don't know if you saw this video interview with Snoop Dogg recently, David, but he was basically calling out streaming and saying, this is untenable, this is unsustainable. When I was doing some research for this space, I was looking at, what percentage of streaming revenues actually go to the artists. And it's a very small percentage actually winds up in the pockets of the artists. So I see both categories of musicians being able to benefit from this.
Yeah, we've always started, and I've always been particularly focused on the independent artists because I think that's where the culture and music is always created, and those are the ones that we can really help change their lives, both from building an audience perspective and from a monetization perspective. I always say it's really hard to make Drake enough money that he actually will care, because he's doing quite well last time I checked. And so we've always started with independent artists. Like, that is where the movement is started and where it's headed. And I think the value prop there is a lot stronger. So I think there's the part of Sound that I think has not been done before is we're really focused on, can we help not only pay artists, and that's already enough of a challenge as is, but also can we break artists? And I think if you have historically, and this is, I always say, like, we're figuring this out in real time. But if you think about it, like the platforms that have been really good at discovering music, TikTok, YouTube, SoundCloud, MySpace, I've never been contacted by an artist saying, hey, I just made a lot of money off TikTok, SoundCloud, YouTube, MySpace. But I have heard, I blew up on TikTok, I blew up on SoundCloud many, many times. And if the platforms that are good at monetizing music, which can be a Spotify or can be a iTunes or, CD sales back in the day, I typically don't get contacted saying, hey, my song's blowing up on Spotify right now, or because of Spotify. It usually happens on one of those discovery platforms. And I think the experiment that I've been wanting to run is, can you build something that not only helps an artist build their fan base, but also helps them get paid at the same time? That's kind of a riddle that we've been working on for over a year now, and I think we're going to crack it. But I think both, historically, an artist kind of had to choose. It's like, you should be happy with the reach and the eyeballs, but no, you shouldn't make money on your music. Or you can make money on your music, but you can't really go viral or, reach millions of listeners. And I think there actually is a world where they both can coexist with each other, which is something that, again, is a big giant experiment that we're trying to figure out. But at the core, we've always obviously tried to make it about getting artists paid, because ultimately, that allows them to create more music and allows them to move on to the next album. And I think at the end of the day, more artists creating and being able to be full-time musicians and is something that's a net positive for the world. So that is the main thing that we strive to do.
Yeah, get discovered and, maybe make enough to sustain yourself along the way. Have your cake and eat it too. Why not? I want to circle back, David, because you mentioned a few interesting things. One is that 100K track per day on Spotify, which is, I actually hadn't heard that before. And that's sort of astounding. That's a lot of new music being put out, which just underlines the fact that it's really difficult to sort of break through the noise and find your audience. The other thing that I definitely agree with that you said is how these new discovery platforms are moving music to the background. I don't use TikTok personally. That's my line in the sand. I refuse to get it, but I do use Instagram. And sometimes I'll be on the explore page and there will be a track in the background that I really want to know about. And it's actually, they make it really hard to even find out who the artist is. Sometimes I'll have my other phone and I'll like Shazam it. But I agree with you. They're definitely moving that music to the background. And so I think you're right that there are problems with music discovery with these new platforms.
Yeah, there's something that I always say is like, you can load any music app in the world right now. You can go to, SoundCloud, YouTube, TikTok, Spotify, or not TikTok, but Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music. I mean, on the homepage, you won't find one playlist generated by a user. It's entirely editorial playlists that are run by, the platforms themselves. And there's nothing actually net wrong with that. But the problem is that there's so much music being uploaded that last I checked, humans still have 2 ears. And so there's only so much music that somebody can listen to on any one day. And I think the only approach, and my DMs are always open because I'm looking for many more, on how people, how you can give every shot a fair chance at being discovered, is if you enlist the masses to basically find and discover new music. And I've always said, like, so we have a lot of great artists in the audience, but like a lot of these artists are incredible music. Like, how do you incentivize people to go check out their new songs? Because I think, again, this isn't the same as, I think I always use the sports analogy where I don't believe that. I think there are tons of amazing music, amazing artists that are just sitting on the shelf right now, waiting to get discovered. And I think there needs to actually be mechanics and product built to encourage people to check out and make celebrating new music or make finding a new artist something that's like really, really fun and exciting. And that's how I always like to build product for myself, but that's how I used to feel when I went to a record store and found and listened to a new album for the first time or new artist. I just felt like I was on the forefront of something that was really, really cool. Today, I think, music is obviously too in the background. So that kind of brings us a little bit to kind of, what are the experiments that we've been running to kind of, do this. And, if cool with you, Mac, I think it'd be cool to dive in on like, what we've been up to so far.
Absolutely. No, that'd be great. Before we do, though, I just want to say one last thing, which is that I've always gravitated towards indie music. I think oftentimes these smaller or lesser known artists are my favorite. I think if we just allowed these sort of arbiters of culture at record labels or large distribution platforms to dictate what gets played, the culture is going to be pretty monotone. We're going to miss out on a lot of really cool voices and some really unique sounds. So anything that can sort of help these indie artists and these unique voices stand out more, I'm in full support of.
I think the thing is, like, growing up, like, there was obviously this really big internet blog era, and people used to have, their blogs. And if you were featured on a blog, that could obviously launch your career. If you were featured on Hype Machine, which was really an aggregator of blogs and everything. And so I think that was I somewhat of my inspiration is like obviously bringing that back in terms of, having individual people and tastemakers be able to curate their music and, not having one particular brand, do that. And I think to me, that's the more, I'm not saying it's going to work, but I think it's the more interesting experiment to be run instead of getting, millions of anonymous listeners that you don't even own or can't reach. And I think it's not necessarily that, like, again, everything usually comes down to incentives, and obviously that's a huge portion of obviously Web3 and crypto is structuring incentives in the right way. I think today, obviously, Spotify and streaming services have one flat subscription rate. They have no incentive. They make the same amount regardless of whether I stream Drake or an independent artist. And so they have no incentive to basically promote any one song over another. And if you're trying to cater to the masses, then truthfully, playing the mainstream music is a very good strategy because most people don't want to check out new music. They're happy listening to the mainstream artists. And that's why I think, I always say Spotify has turned a little bit into like radio with every single song, or a pretty interface, I say. And so to me, I think it's really not about trying to compete with something that's actually working for a lot of people. It's really about trying to build something that's net new. And I think today the opportunity to serve something net new is the hardcore music fans who care about music discovery, even if there's not that many of them, and the independent artists that are looking for more ways to reach new fans and try something different that's a little bit more music centric than a TikTok, because not artists make music to make music, and that's ultimately why they got into being an artist in the first place. Not everyone becomes an artist to make TikTok videos. And so to me, I think something that's been missing is like, can we build a music centric discovery product where all we're asking of artists is to upload music? Because I think that is like, I think something lost in the picture is obviously artists should promote their music, and marketing is really important, but I think a lot of the work goes into making music, and making music is, I've tried many times. I don't even understand. I cannot. I have so much respect for just trying to put any song together. It's like impossible. So let alone putting multiple songs together. It always blows my mind. So I think we undervalue just how much work it takes to make incredible music, and we need to celebrate that more. So yeah, I think that's kind of the last thing I wanted to add, Matt.
That was you said something very interesting, which is that Spotify is the new radio. And I think there was a time, I think it started with like LimeWire, and then it moved into these streaming platforms where there was a lot of opportunity for up and coming artists, because you had unprecedented a new way to share your music with the world. But I tend to agree with you. It seems like now these platforms have become sort of so entrenched and so large that, yeah, they become like the new radio. It's like this analogy of like you sort of end up, you turn into your parents eventually. And I think if you're a new artist and you're doing something unique, you need to look for ever new avenues to reach your audience and share what you're doing.
Yeah, the business model just doesn't make. It's not that anyone's doing anything wrong per se. The business model doesn't lend itself to basically discovering new music. It also, artists don't own any of the relationship with their audience on Spotify. They can't message them. They can't export their emails. Nothing. And so again, I'm more interested in building something that hasn't been built before, than and even failing doing so, than trying to copy something that's already out there that works for a subset of artists. Because Spotify is working for the biggest artists in the world, but there's none of them are complaining, and you won't find them complaining. I think it's more interesting on who are the people that could use our help, and can we build something that's actually of value to them, and also for music listeners and consumers who, I think, there's a lot of these big editorial playlists on Spotify that have millions of listeners. I truly believe that there are kids in their bedroom that have incredible taste in music, that are on the forefront of culture, that can run those playlists just as well. And so to me, I think it's more around having an army of people that can discover new music and promote it, rather than having a select few that only work at one company. So I think that is the experiment that I always like, a little bit of chaos. And I think that's the experiment that we obviously want to run, and we're early in that journey, but we got to get started somewhere.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think you're smart to lean into the indie side of things. That being said, it is fascinating to me that people like Snoop Dogg are also critical of streaming services. There's also, I think there's a reason I can't find a Jay-Z song on YouTube. I think he launched that other platform. I forget the name of it. You probably know, David.
Yeah.
You know what I'm referring to? Yeah. And wasn't one of the main things with that was to pay artists more for the streams?
Yeah, I don't know if that's somewhat worked out to be true, but not its entirety. That's a deeper conversation for another day. But I think overall, I think artists are always, I mean, at the end of the day, artists are businessmen as well. Jay-Z, said that himself. And I think in general, music has been one of the more under monetized media assets, if not the most. I think one of the things I think about is the gap between consumption and monetization, and I think nothing is larger than music. So if something is consumed a lot, it should probably be worth something because people are consuming it a lot. And people play or listen to music way more than they play video games, but the video industry is magnitudes bigger than the music industry. And I think something that is actually, I use the video game industry a lot as an analogy because, it's not too long ago that we sold video games at like $50 or $60, a piece or some fixed amount in order to play that video game. And it's not too long ago that we sold music at $9.99 to listen to music. And obviously, the video game industry has adjusted their business model, and now it really is free to play with like things like Fortnite and Call of Duty, and you can buy all these skins or in-game items, and they're making a lot more money now than they were when they were charging $60. So I'm not saying that that's like the necessarily the right business model for music, but I think it kind of shows that the music industry has lagged behind some other of its peer industries. And I think part of that is like, again, today music still has one price, one point to access. And I think in order to figure out if we're missing something, maybe the answer is it's totally fine what's going on today, but we have to run these experiments in order to, like, you're not going to get there by accident. And so I think that's something that I think I've taken a lot of inspiration from the video game industry, because I think there's a lot of untapped potential with how you basically build economies around songs, albums, artists, that's being left on the table today, based on the one price model that exists.
Yeah, I think anytime that something is just ridiculously cheap, oftentimes there's going to be a sort of hidden cost involved, right? So look, I come at it from both sides, and I can understand both angles because I'm an artist myself, but also a big music consumer. And yeah, I've gotten very accustomed to my, 10.99 Spotify subscription a month, and I can listen to almost anything I want to. But I think it is important to note that there is someone at the other end of that transaction, and they may not be fairly compensated for the work that they're creating.
Yeah, I would say like consumers are generally pretty happy. Like, it's one of the greatest deals in the history of the world is paying $9.99 a month to access every single song ever. It's almost like it's like they could raise their prices. Like, there's no way I obviously stop paying that. And so to me, I think the problems are, it's made music so cheap that there literally is no way. Like, let's say I like an artist's song and I want to give it $5 just because it's my favorite song ever, it changed my life. I literally have no way to do that. I can't even do it even if I wanted to on something like a streaming service today. And that was something that always bothered me. And then two, like, your money isn't directly going to the artist. And I think it goes into a pool that then gets distributed. And I think there is something quite powerful about, like, when we purchased CDs or iTunes back in the day, even if it wasn't, it felt like it was going to the artist. At least that's how I felt, because it was that direct connection. And that's something that I definitely want to restore or try to restore. I mean, kind of, I think now is probably a good time to segue into, like, okay, like, we want to solve two problems. We want to help artists reach people with their music. We want to help artists make money. Like, what have we been doing? And I always say, like, some of it is calculated and some of it is chaos. But we started with this like idea. I was like obviously very inspired by other, NFT products out there, and scarcity is something that has been at the core of the crypto space for a long time, and collecting vinyl is something that's already very ingrained in music, and there's always been this concept of scarcity with collecting vinyl. And I was like, when we started, I was like, let's sell a fixed amount of music NFTs per song and make these things really, really scarce. And so we didn't know if anyone wants to do that, because with most ideas that I have, I'm always like, it could be a really stupid idea, because a lot of them are. And so I asked, the first artist that was joining Sound, who was this artist Oshi, do you think we could sell 20? He's like, I think we could sell 30. I'm like, okay, like, let's meet in the middle, 25. Made up that number, sold 25. It sold out in like 1 second. I was like, wow, this is crazy. It's 25 people want to collect music online. Like, that's the coolest thing ever. And, we basically did that for a long time, paying artists, $10,000 a day at the time. And then, what happens is artists are like, well, I don't want to just do 25 forever. Let me do more. And so we started to play around with bigger like edition sizes. And, then I started to get asked a lot of questions on what price should I do and what quantity should I do. I was like, well, I have some data. I can tell you what other artists have been doing, but I can't tell you this is like a scientific formula. And at the time, like, open editions, which was this trend that, you could, instead of there was kind of two ways to skin a cat here. There was one where you pick a price and a quantity, and we call that a fixed edition. And there was another one where you pick an open edition, which is like it's like scarce on time. So it's as many people as want to mint within a certain time period, like 24 hours. And then, some people really miss the scarcity of the fixed editions where, no matter what, there's going to be 50. I think the positive to open editions was it created this like infinite upside thing for both the artist and the community, where you don't really like, it's kind of interesting to just see how many people mint it, regardless of what that number is. And so I think both really had merit. Like I think there's some incredibly powerful open editions that existed on Sound. And then I think there's some incredible scarce fixed editions. But there's always been this tension, as I said, between reach and monetization in terms of, obviously artists want to monetize their music, but also they also want to reach 1 million people. And how do you have something that reaches 1 million people that's still scarce? And we experimented with this new thing that we launched called Sound Swap, where it's a flat price for the first 24 hours, and then the price starts to rise as more people buy and fall as people sell. So we've always been at the forefront of like trying to experiment with new minting formats, because I'm deeply unsatisfied with fixed editions and open editions. I think they both have pros and cons. And I think the riddle that I can share a little bit about, and definitely part of the reason why we experimented with moving to Optimism, is I think there are ways to have scarcity and reach at the same time. Meaning, I think you can get 1 million mints on a song and still have it be scarce. And that might seem like a little bit crazy, but there's some new minting formats that I really want to experiment with. And what started to happen was, a lot of the times, obviously with layer one, gas fees, and I'll also chime in on why we started on Ethereum in the first place. Well, the gas fee to collect the song ended up being more expensive than the actual music NFT itself. And that started to bother me, because I was like, well, we started this thing to pay artists. That was like why we did this. When you purchase and the gas fee is really high, that money is not going to the artist. It's going, as I always joke, to the Ethereum mining organization. And so I think it was literally taking dollars that could have gone to an artist's pocket and contributing it somewhere else. And so I think it really became important that we found a solution where every dollar, or as much of the money that we could possibly generate, goes into an artist's pocket. And that's where we started to kind of look at viable options out there. And I think one of the things is we really liked the community of like the Ethereum culture. And part of the reason we started on ETH was the ideals and the value set. And obviously that's where NFT action was. And we wanted to change as little about that as possible. And so one of the requirements was like the contracts need to be priced in ETH, executed in ETH. Everything about it needs to feel the same. We just want no gas fees. And Optimism, made it as light as possible for us to like uplift what we were currently doing. And honestly, if you've been a user of Sound, or you go to our website, like literally nothing has changed. Like the UX is we're not there's not some like crazy delta in the experience of collecting on ETH and collecting on Optimism. The only difference is you get this MetaMask pop-up, and the gas fee basically is non-existent. MetaMask has a bug right now where it's showing $0, which I think is more true than not true. But seeing artists' faces, we did the first upload with Sammy Arriaga and Ray Isla, and obviously with the Optimism team for the OP mint, and like I think it was like 30 cents or 40 cents to like deploy multiple contracts for like a song and a split. So that was just something that I think is really, really helpful, and obviously resonates with artists. And I think the next challenge will be building the collecting community and making, again, it's less about doing what we could do on mainnet. It's more about creating new games that we weren't able to do on layer one, and making new formats and trying new things. And as I said, it's all just an experiment. But I think that the challenge and why we were excited to move over to OP was, can we get 1 million mints on a song and also have a little bit of scarcity at the same time, which is a riddle that I've been banging my head against the table for the last 6 months. So I think we got some exciting things in the pipeline after we open up Sound.
Yeah, super exciting, and plus one to all that. And yeah, I'm so excited that you're on OP mainnet for a variety of reasons, not the least of which that these gas fees are so low that more of the value is just going where it should, which is to the artists. And so that means collectors are able to collect more and artists are able to create more. David, you said something that I want to just circle back on, which is this idea of having this large open edition mint, but having it still be scarce. And you brought up the example of maybe something has a million mints, but it's still scarce. I want you, if you could, just elaborate on that. My guess, if I were to guess, it would be that, yeah, okay, a million mints face value, that sounds like a lot, but you have songs on YouTube they have, a few million, tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of listens. So maybe in that context, it actually isn't all that much, and it is still scarce.
Yeah. So I think it could be scarce, but I think it depends. Obviously, like what obviously there are plenty of examples of crypto products that have millions and millions of supply that are still considered scarce. Most famously, Bitcoin. But I think there are other ways. Keep it cryptic for today. There are other ways that you can have many scarce objects. I'll give one example. I think like we famously had this thing called the golden egg on Sound, which everything starts at Sound as a meme, including obviously the song that we put out with Optimism. But basically, it is a one of one. In addition, when the song sells out, we release a random one of one NFT that the artist uploaded a special artwork for to a collector at random. You can't buy it, you can't pay your way to get it. It's distributed at random, and they usually trade for two different prices. The one of one trades for a much higher price than the normal base edition because there's only one of them. And that's an example of like how you can have different prices for different assets. And I think one of the things is it's a two-pronged approach, and I've been struggling, and I think one thing, if there's anything I've changed my mind on more than anything else over the last year, is I think I used to have the position that you either have to choose. You have to choose between this scarce asset, and you can charge large amounts and only get a certain amount because everyone understands scarcity, and then or you could have this like free or open or cheap mint that goes to as many people as possible, but then you might not be able to have that same scarcity effect. I think there are ways to achieve both, and I think there it makes I think cheap mints became basically untenable on something like mainnet when the gas. I think anytime where the gas fees are is greater than the amount going to an artist, probably an unstarter. And so I think really we wanted to move over to Optimism to just play around with and new minting formats that we haven't been able to try on mainnet. And I think music has, because it resonates so deeply with so many people, everyone listens to music. I think, or most do, the ones that I talk to. But there's a big opportunity for music to kind of be one of the beacons of light in this nice little bear market. And I think there are a lot of really, really cool minting formats that I hope, collecting music on chain are going to kind of prove and show the value and obviously the reach and monetization potential of something of music. So a lot of fun stuff coming up, and I think there are a couple major milestones that we wanted. One of them was moving to Optimism. Obviously, the next is opening up Sound to the public, and I think once we get those two things done, one of which is already done, and then the chaos begins.
Yeah, I'm continually surprised by how scarcity is sort of like a psychological lever. I'm aware of it at work, and I even witness it in myself, where I'm excited to see if I minted this golden artwork edition for this Optimism music NFT. It's just really fascinating sort of psychology at play. A friend recently told me he collects Magic the Gathering cards, and he said that they're launching this Lord of the Rings edition, and they're printing one singular ring card. And he said there's a corporation that's planning on buying up all these cards with the goal of hopefully trying to get this one card and spending millions of dollars to do so. But that's how valuable this one card will be, or at least they expect it to be.
I think one thing about music that's been a principle of mine since the beginning is music is not about how rich you are. Music is the reason why I love music more. Well, there's two reasons why I love music more than anything else. One is that it brings people closer together and it kind of transcends, every type of barrier out there. And then two, I have a low attention span, and music is 3 minutes to change your life. And I think it's by far it can immediately listen to one song, change your whole mood. And I think it's something that's always gravitated to my short attention span. So I think like there's so much opportunity to make music and meet people with where they're at. And so one of the things that's really important to me is like regardless of how much money somebody has, they should be able to participate and support the artist. And then for the people that do have the means to support, they should be able to have an experience that caters to them as well. And so I think something that's also going to be, true of sound is we want to build something for everyone. And that also means on the artist side, in terms of building things that work for bigger artists and things that work for independent artists. We want to build things for people who only have $1 to spend. We want to build things for people who want to spend $5,000. There's such an opportunity to build, again, not having to choose, and build this economy around music. And I think for too long it's been one price, one person, one segment. And I think this is where I think video games has surpassed music, where you can, play the game for free or play the game for some cheap amount and then let people spend as much as they want to spend. And so I think there's a lot of precedent and parallel for creating. It's not either or, it's how do we create more and more options for how to collect and support music, because I think that's honestly the net positive. I think we're used to having to fight over one stream or one stream of revenue. And I think the more sources of revenue, like in every other part of the world, you want to diversify and have as many streams of income as possible. But the more sources of revenue for music, the better. And I think we gotta get them off the ground.
Absolutely. Yeah. Both from the artist and the collector side, it's not one size fits all, right? It's providing this freedom and flexibility for a variety of different use cases.
Totally. And I think ultimately, all we can do is build it. And I like referring to sound more as a set of, tools than a platform. But all you can ultimately do is give collectors and give artists the tools and let them do what they're best at, which is create. Honestly, like, I've been so surprised by how artists will use the tool and how collectors will use the tool and how, developers can build on top of it. And so there's just, I think that's the kind of the beauty of the Web3 space, is really just like letting people kind of use and build on top of it in ways that you couldn't have even otherwise imagined. Like, there's a couple people that have built entire music players on top of sound. Never thought anyone would do that when I started the project. And so I think one of the things that's been consistently true is I don't always know how people are going to receive or, use it. I think all you can really do is build and ship. And, we're always talking about shipping because that's the main thing we're doing, and, let people kind of experience and try things out. So this was a key step in the right direction, was obviously kind of getting the chance. And it's been a privilege to kind of work with the Optimism team, and just been super impressed by how responsive everyone is, and just making it feel really special for us, because this was obviously a huge milestone for us. Was kind of, we moving from just kind of one assumption, like we're going to be on mainnet, to handling like a low cost option. And we're always going to have our fair share of issues on a launch, but if we look besides that, I think it's been really cool to kind of see how this has resonated with everyone. And yeah, I think it's never one person or one company. It takes so many people. So I have a long list of people to thank. So thank you to everyone at the Optimism team and foundation and labs for making this possible.
Absolutely, and thank you. This has been absolutely fun. And as you said, this is just the start, right? We're playing the long game here. And I can certainly say that I really resonated with what you said about experimentation and iteration. We definitely have that philosophy here. It's all about design, ship, iterate, improve. We do that with everything, with the protocol, with the governance. Sounds like you do as well. David, I think we're close to winding down here. I could honestly continue talking with you for hours about nerding out about the music industry and music, but I want to be respectful of your time. Is there anything else you want to add here before we close out this episode of OP Radio?
No, I think, as I said, thank you for having me. I think the last thing I'll say is, like, yeah, we always say the same thing. We're just getting started. And I think, as excited as I am about, obviously, launching on Optimism, I think it's really just the start of what's possible, and kind of the minting formats that we're going to be playing around with. And I know everyone's obviously been super patient, something that I take very seriously. But I think, now that we have this behind us, and we're underway on the last feature that we're building before we open up Sound. I think once we open up Sound, to have a low cost and obviously still, an option, that's when the fun really gets started. And I think the goal is to have as much fun and chaos over the next, couple of months. And I think I truly believe, and we're going to show it, that like collecting music on chain can be one of the things that kind of takes kind of Web3 adoption to the masses. And I think it's going to happen this year. I don't think it's going to take us as long as people think. And yeah, we're gonna make it happen. So I think music is something that is going to lead, as it always has, just creating culture online. And we're gonna have a fun time the rest of the year. Is all I can say. So thank you, Mac, for having us. And I'm always around for anybody in the Optimism community anytime.
Absolutely. And one last question, David, because people have already been asking me, they have friends that want to put music on Sound. When will Sound be opened up to the general public, if you're at liberty to say, or when can we expect generally?
Very, very, very soon. I can't give the specific date because I've been making sure. I think one thing I've made the mistake before is announcing something before I see the ships coming to the harbor. But the writing is on the wall. It will be very, very soon, and yeah, we're excited. So I think I can finally say like this won't be a long wait. So I mean, now that the the Optimism launch is underway, we're down to the final feature that we're building over the next couple weeks, and that's pretty much it. So there's a little teaser for you.
Awesome. I've been thinking about for almost a year now picking up guitar, so maybe this will be the inspiration to get me to actually do that, so I can put a song up on Sound.xyz when it's ready.
Yeah, and I think it's fitting that Optimism now has the most minted song on Sound. I forget what we're at, but it's probably near 50,000 mints. And the best part is, I actually think that there's some artists in the audience that will shatter that at some point in Sound's future. So I think it's always really, really cool, and to see just I pitch. I love crazy memes, ideas, whatnot. And so when I pitched Optimism on making a music NFT, I thought there's no way they say yes, because why would a scaling infrastructure company in crypto say yes to making a music NFT? And lo and behold, they said yes. So you don't know unless you ask. So thank you guys for being just such good participants and really just having fun with us and kind of showing that you guys are fully behind it by releasing music. So, and the song's great as always.
No, absolutely. I'm so glad that we were able to make that happen. And, I've long since said that there are people may not know this, but a lot of people in the Optimism Collective are artists themselves. And so I think there's just a fantastic culture fit here. And I'm so glad we could create this cultural artifact for this announcement and put it out. And if people want to listen to this music NFT that we've been referencing, it's called V-Buterin. It was made by Ben Jones, once again, and Gigamesh. You can find it on sound.xyz. I'm going to give you a warning, though. This song is extremely catchy. So it's the kind of song that is going to stick in your head for a while. If that happens, you can do like I do and just keep playing it until you're absolutely sick of it. Okay, I think that about rounds it out for today. Thank you, David. This has been a really fun conversation, and can't wait to see what's next for Sound.xyz on Optimism.
Thank you, Mac. You're the best. We'll talk soon.
Sounds good. See you, y'all. Have a great rest of your day. Stay optimistic.